Well, a very good morning to you from BBC One. It's approaching 6:30 and time for the BBC's Breakfast News, presented this morning by Nicholas Witchell and Jill Dando.
Morning to you from Jill and me. You're watching the BBC Breakfast News. The time is 6:30. The headlines this morning, Tuesday the 18th of June. Margaret Thatcher has condemned the idea of a federal Europe. She said she was in full agreement with Mr Major, but she warned that a single European currency would take the heart out of Britain's Parliament. Douglas Brand, the British engineer imprisoned for life by Iraq, has been set free. Mr Brand was released after secret contact between Edward Heath and Saddam Hussein. The British government knew nothing. Now this morning's business headlines from Paul Burden.
Good morning. The water industry's independent referee shows the privatised companies the yellow card. They aren't investing enough in infrastructure, he says. Ian Barrett also warns them against spending too much on diversification. Tank manufacturer Vickers prepares for victory. A cabinet committee is expected to choose Challenger 2 for the British Army. And Portugal's small economic miracle, how the port of Setúbal wooed foreign investors and cut unemployment to zero. And after Mrs Thatcher's speech in Chicago, the markets leave the pound little changed.
Thanks, Paul. All the business stories in just a moment. But first, a summary of the main national and world news from Jill.
Good morning. In the United States, Mrs Thatcher has spoken out against plans for a federal Europe. In a carefully worded speech, she backed John Major's stand opposing moves towards political union. But comments in a later question and answer session are likely to be seized on by the opposition.
Mrs Thatcher was given a polite ovation for her speech, but it was in the questions which followed that she became animated.
Are there circumstances under which you would accept a single European currency?
What a single European currency would mean is that the control of the economy would leave your own country and go to non-elected people in the European community. That would take the heart out of the purpose of our Parliament.
She didn't say never to a single currency, but she left no one in much doubt. That's what she believes.
The British engineer Douglas Brand is expected to travel to Jordan today following his release from an Iraqi jail. Mr Brand, who'd been jailed for life for spying, was set free after secret contacts between Saddam Hussein and the former Prime Minister Edward Heath. We have a report from Ian Fronovich.
Brand was the first member of the family to hear the news that his father was to be released after spending 9 months in an Iraqi jail accused of spying.
There's always been hope, particularly recently with the pressure of sanctions and the intervention of the Russians and other nations. It's just marvellous.
Mr Brand's release was a result of links established between Saddam Hussein and the former Prime Minister Edward Heath. But it's unlikely to mean the lifting of sanctions on Iraq, while another Briton, Ian Richter, is still in jail in Baghdad.
The all-party talks on the future of Ulster enter their second day with submissions from the unionist parties this morning on their objectives. The start of the talks yesterday was described as businesslike by the Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Brook. Hopes for a superpower summit have been raised following apparent concessions from the Soviet Union on arms control. President Bush has told reporters that he's encouraged by a letter from the Soviet President, Mr Gorbachev. He said both sides now seem close to agreement on reducing stockpiles of long-range nuclear missiles.
We'll be back with more news, of course, at 7 o'clock. But now for this morning's business breakfast with Paul Burden and Fiona Foster.
Hello. Just a year after they were privatised, the water supply companies are being severely reprimanded by the independent watchdog appointed to prevent them abusing their monopoly powers. Ofwat, in its annual report, reviews the industry's £28 billion capital expenditure programme. The report reveals that the water and sewerage companies have underspent their capital investment programme by £49 million, 3% below the projected figure. While most companies say this underspend will be made up, the Director General of Ofwat, Ian Byatt, says that if the slippage continues, he'll have to consider what action to take to protect customers from paying out too much money for improvements which are not yet taking place. He's also written to the water companies about diversification. Mr. Byatt says that he plans to tighten up the legislation and amend licences in order to provide protection for their core businesses. Ian Byatt joins me now from our Birmingham studio. Can I turn to that question of diversification, first of all, the investment of the water companies in all sorts of other activities like running hotels? How worried are you about the threat that it poses to their basic function?
Well, I'm obviously concerned that their main job is to provide good water and get rid of sewage at reasonable prices, and I don't want that to be damaged in any way. Of course, I'm not against diversification by itself. What I'm concerned is that it shouldn't adversely affect the core business.
How much are you in a position to control what they actually do? Isn't it the lesson of the other privatisations of big natural monopolies like telecom and gas that once they're in the free market they can jolly well do what they like?
Not at all. They can't do what they like. For example, what I'm determined to prevent is any attempt to set up subsidiary companies which then sell things to the core business at an inflated price. And I'm going to have studies with the industry to determine how that's going to work properly. And also, as you pointed out, I have suggested a change in the licence to ensure that the financial resources of the core business are properly protected from any adverse diversification.
Are you saying it's not the diversification into non-water businesses that worries you, but the possibility of a restructuring in which the way the books are written is completely changed?
It's not the diversification by itself, it's the consequences that diversification could have if not undertaken properly for the core business. And that's partly the question of, as you say, how the books are written. Also, it's a question of maintaining intact the financial resources needed to mount this very large investment programme.
At what level should we be worried about the company's ability to meet their commitments on the investment programme?
Well, I'm monitoring these investment programmes, and I'll be looking at the last year recently, and if the companies are not undertaking the investment programmes on which these price limits were largely based, then it's my job to reduce the extent to which they can raise prices.
Ian Byatt, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at the markets now. On the foreign exchanges, the pound, after coming under heavy selling pressure yesterday, hasn't showed much reaction to Mrs Thatcher's speech overnight. It's currently down just over 1/3 cent at 161.92. It's up almost a penny against the Deutschmark at 292.86. That probably due to the fact that people are dumping the mark for every currency in the Far East, according to one dealer there. The dollar has also gained against the Deutschmark. It's up almost a pfennig at 180.73, down very slightly against the yen at 140 yen 95. While Tokyo stocks have continued yesterday's slide, profit takers whittling away last week's gains. Just before the close, the Nikkei is down 151 points at 24,791. Paul.
Later today, a Cabinet Committee chaired by the Prime Minister will make a decision of crucial importance to the UK's defence industry. Ministers are expected to approve a £300 million order to the engineering group Vickers for the supply of a new main battle tank for the British Army. That would safeguard some 1,500 jobs in Leeds and Newcastle, where the Challenger 2 is built. David Frank reports.
For more than 3 years now, the Challenger 2 tank, built by Vickers, has been locked in competition with American, French and German rivals to replace the Army's ageing Chieftain tank. Vickers chairman, Sir David Plaistow, has severely criticised the government for delaying its decision several times already. At the heart of the delay, it seems, a conflict between commercial factors and military aims.
Some people in the military wanted to have the best tank for the job. They wanted value for money. Other people in the government, such as the Department of Trade and Industry, were more concerned with Britain's export opportunities, British jobs and industrial concerns. Now that battle is probably what's kept this issue in front of the press for so long and what's given Vickers such a hard time of it.
But an order that would originally have been worth over £1 billion for 600 tanks has, over the long months, been whittled away by defence cutbacks to something closer to 130 tanks worth £300 million. Union chiefs are therefore urging Vickers to continue to diversify.
Good news in the short term for the tank industry in Britain, which employs 10,000 people. But it will only be a temporary respite unless companies like Vickers use the base load of a 5-year contract to plan for the future.
Vickers says the government's dithering over the contract is jeopardising vital export orders, a charge defence experts say should be treated with some scepticism.
Every arms manufacturer likes to talk up the export potential of their product, but I think the case with Vickers and the Challenger 2 is that there is a lot of international competition, so we shouldn't get carried away with the thought that we'll instantly find export orders for hundreds of Challenger 2s.
Challenger's high-class performance in the Gulf should help swing this decision Vickers' way. But ironically, America's role in the war may mean that the all-important Middle East export market could be harder to crack in the immediate future.
Two large orders for the Airbus have fuelled the row between Europe and the United States over government subsidies to the four-nation aircraft consortium Airbus Industrie. Kuwait Airways is buying up to 24 aircraft and the American Federal Express another 50 in deals totalling over £3 billion. Our aviation correspondent Christopher Wayne reports.
Federal Express is one of the world's biggest cargo airlines, and a 50-plane launch order means Airbus Industrie can at last build a specialised cargo plane. But to win the FedEx order, Airbus had to